All right, so all of that being said, the story we wanted to start with this morning is President Biden and his administration making some moves to address the monopoly in meat packing. We wanted to lead with this because it's an important issue. It's also something we've been following here. I don't know if you guys checked out, and we're going to play a little bit of our interview with Bill Bullard, who has been an incredible advocate for ranchers, pointing out that, listen, prices for beef have gotten extraordinarily high for consumers, for meat in general. And that high price is not at all being passed on to the people who are all actually raising and producing those animals, in particular cattle. So you might recall that previously the Biden administration, they sort of like put down a talking point sheet about this and said, oh, we're probably going to do something about this. Well, now they are taking some action. It is winning some bipartisan praise and also some bipartisan criticism. So we'll take you into the specifics here. Let's go ahead and throw this first tear sheet up on the screen. This is from Bloomberg News. It says Biden to launch plan to fight meatpacking giants on inflation. He joined Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack and Attorney General Merrick Garland to meet virtually with ranchers and farmers to hear their complaints about consolidation in the industry. A newly launched portal is going to allow them to report unfair trade practices by meat packers. And they're also going to highlight initiatives that they're taking to counter meat packers' economic power. And the big piece that they're doing here, the thing that was sort of most significant, is they're providing $1 billion in federal aid to help with the expansion of independent processors, and new competition regulations are also under consideration. So that $1 billion that they're effectively providing to incentivize new meat packers to start or to prop up and expand existing operations is the big thing. And the reason that they're focused on this is because at this point, and this is a new dynamic, by the way, just in the past several decades, 4 large meatpacking giants control more than 80% of U.S. beef processing capacity. By the way, and of course, Matt Stoller, we can put his chart that he tweeted there up on the screen. This actually came from the White House data, but it's a good chart. It shows the red line is how much wholesale beef value is going up, while cattle value is basically staying flat. So what that means is that the people who are selling it at the end are making massive profit because the price is going up and up. But again, the people who are actually the ranchers, who are actually raising the cattle, are getting totally screwed. Bill Bullard told us they're dropping like flies. They can't stay in business because for them, the price is so low. Even to you, the price is so high. It matters for that. It also matters because we saw during the pandemic how fragile it made our processing system. Because when you have such consolidation, one chain has an issue and bam, that massively impacts your supply of meat. And as we know, these meat processing plants ended up being hotbeds of coronavirus spread, especially at the beginning before we had vaccines, when we had, this very dangerous strain. So that's another reason why this is important. So I'll pause there and then we can talk about some of the bipartisan response.
Yeah, but I think the bipartisan response is actually really heartening. I mean, it's very, very difficult to find anything that can unify anyone. On this side, we have both anti-monopolists and also people who represent large farm districts. So, even a libertarian, Thomas Massey, let's put this up there on the screen. He says, thread, the Biden administration is over the target. 4 companies control the majority of meat processed in the United States. This quadropoly of corporate middlemen have driven up prices in stores while depressing prices paid to struggling farmers. This is, again, a very important, way in order to foster at least some sort of bipartisan cooperation. We'd also pointed out and asked Bill Bullard whenever he was on the show, Chuck Grassley, another senator from the Midwest, let's put that up there on the screen. He, again, actually tweeted some of his praise there, especially regarding the bipartisan bill currently addressing the cattle market. Now, look,
Grassley
Bill
has a special way of communicating
the man
on Twitter,
is,
by the way. He's a great follow if you aren't already.
If you speak septuagenarian, you should be able to decipher it. I personally do not. I'm doing my best in order to translate for everyone. However, I do think that this once again shows that because we do have a crisis in terms of the price of food undeniably going up, cattle input price risen slightly, and we've gone into some of the reasons why, also because of drought, all of that. But with the vast majority of the price increase being hiked up by the meat packers themselves, yesterday we revealed to all of you that 60% nearly of the current inflation price of cost is actually going directly to corporate profits, not small businessmen, but Fortune 500 companies who are using input prices as an excuse to jack up the price higher than the necessary commensurate increase in the actual price. They're using it and they're actually bragging about it to a lot of their shareholders. Remember Bill Bullard, he was one of the guests that we posted while we were off for the holidays, he works for, was it RCAF?
Yeah.
It's an organization dedicated to protecting small ranchers and going after the meatpacking kind of oligarchy who are basically destroying the American ranching way of life. And when we talked to him about it, wanted to highlight part of that interview. Let's take a listen.
Just take us into some of the reasons why beef prices have gone up so much.
Well, the reason is the marketplace is fundamentally broken. You have 4 packers controlling 85% of the fed cattle market. They have control over the marketplace. We filed an antitrust lawsuit against the big 4 packers, alleging that they have conspired to artificially depress prices to cattle producers, while at the same time inflating prices to consumers. So for the past 6 years, we've seen consumer beef prices rising, and we've seen cattle prices falling. In fact, they're moving in the opposite directions. And this is a great concern because the only ingredient in beef is cattle. And so there should be a harmonious relationship between the 2 price points, but that's not occurred. And since 2017, we've seen beef prices skyrocketing that consumers are paying at the grocery store. And at the same time, we have cattle producers who are being forced out of business because they cannot receive their cost of production from the broken marketplace. And we have 2 problems. We have a lack of competition in the entire live cattle marketing structure, and then we have globalization.
There you go. I mean, he lays it all out there. The meat industry is so broken. Bill is the first person who ever highlighted me to it. I had no idea, Krystal, about that country of origin labeling.
Yeah.
How you can say product of USA and you're from Uruguay. I mean, people who are consumers think, and I did, thought I was supporting American ranchers. You're not. They've literally rigged the labeling standards from the USDA. They've rigged the laws. They've rigged the marketplace. And now, and people like Bill, his families, people out there in the West, I mean, this is, part of the American identity, the American way of life being completely destroyed by these corporate monopolies. So for once, Biden doing something good, but you found a very prescient criticism, which we do have to highlight. Right?
Yeah, I mean, so here's what I would say. I think this is directionally right. I think that he's focused in the right direction. Because I do think, listen, there's a lot of reasons that we've gotten into here about what's causing the spike in prices, but one of the issues is corporate greed.
Oh,
one of the issues
100%.
is consolidation. Stoller has done a better job than anyone of breaking down exactly what the numbers are and exactly what's happening here. And by the way, these folks are admitting it on their earnings call.
Yeah, they're like,
they're
we're
telling their
jacking
show
them up.
the inflation, this is actually great for us. We're able to, I'm paraphrasing, but we're able to increase our prices way beyond what they're, and they expect that even when the inflation dies down, they're going to be able to keep their prices high because people have gotten used to this new standard and they can get away with it. The meatpacking industry is one of the most egregious examples because you see how they are reaping record profits, how some of the highest price spikes are in meat at the grocery store when you're trying to feed your family. And meanwhile, on the other end, the ranchers are getting completely screwed. So I'm glad that they are talking about this and focusing on this. But the actual plan itself here, wildly insufficient. I dug in because this isn't my specific area of expertise to see what people who are advocates and are experts are saying. And basically every single one is saying, thanks, but this is not really going to do anything. I saw one person on Twitter saying that, imagine that your idea for how to deal with Google was like, oh, we're going to help prop up Ask Jeeves.
Yeah, that's right. It's
right?
Like, wait,
that's
what?
not going to work because you haven't dealt with the larger structural issues. And then what's going to happen? Google's going to buy Ask Jeeves for pennies on the dollar. So you actually only ultimately could be fueling making the big guys even bigger by propping up weak competitors who ultimately they're just going to be able to acquire. So it's really ultimately extremely insufficient. It ends up because of that just being kind of a virtue signal of, them being able to go out and say, hey, we're doing something and look at this problem, which is a real problem. I think the only reason why they're even paying attention to this is because of some of the good people like Lena Khan that the antitrust movement has been able to put into positions of power. So it shows that their organization, the fact that they had people and personnel ready to go into the pipeline has made a difference. But ultimately, let's put this criticism up on the screen. This is from another rancher, an advocate, similarly positioned as Bill Bullard, but this guy's name is Mike Calicrate. And he just says, listen, if you aren't strengthening antitrust law enforcement, if you don't have truth in labeling, something that Bill Bullard talks a lot about, if you don't stop subsidizing industrial agriculture, and if you don't stop favoring large plants over small processors, then you're ultimately not really addressing the issue here. And so, look, that's the problem. If you actually want to deal with market consolidation, you have to deal with getting a lot of hate, a lot of anger, going directly head-to-head against a very powerful industry. And so far, there has been no willingness from the Biden administration ultimately to do that.
Well, this is why Washington is so broken. They can say $1 billion for a tiny little fund. Ultimately, that's all that's really within the executive's purview. They have to work with Congress. Congress is broken. They're working on Build Back Better, if that's even such a thing. Now they're focused on voting rights. I mean, look, you can think those are important. I think there are much bigger problems that we could focus on right now. Meat is obviously one of the biggest ones. There's no endorsement of the bill. And look, let's also be honest. Would this actually get a bunch of Republican votes in the Senate, a filibuster-proof majority? I don't know. I can't tell you the answer to that.
It was telling, too. Yeah. We put the Thomas Massey Libertarian tweet up there, which, by the way, he himself has like 50 head of cattle or something like that. So he has a little bit of a financial interest in this as well, which I think it's important to disclose. But his initial tweet was like, they're over the target. And then he's like, but what we really need is deregulation. So when it gets down to the brass tacks of what you're going to do, then, you know, he's not as much into, okay, let's break them up. Let's move in the direction of antitrust. Let's prop up the small processors and things like that. So when you get down to the solution, it gets a little more complicated. But I actually disagree that there's not anything the Biden administration could do. In the past, when you've had presidents, people like FDR, who would even, you know, indicate that their administration was going to go after these big monopolies, it actually constrained their behavior. Because the biggest check on a monopoly in terms of their pricing power is public outrage. And so by just calling attention to it and creating public outrage and having a credible threat that you're going to do something serious about it, you're going to break them up, that can in and of itself actually constrain their behavior and drop prices.
I completely agree with you. The problem is the Biden administration is historically unpopular. You know, if you're meat packers, you're like, why should I care what you have to say? You're one of the most historically unpopular presidents in modern history. You're barely alive. I mean, like, whenever you give a speech, has he actually even given a speech on this? I don't think so. I mean, they've called it out maybe once or twice from the podium. The public's energy is all directed towards Omicron. To back up and have that ability, you have to be popular.
Well, you have to not just have to be popular, you have to have a credible threat. And so far, there's no credible threat that they're really going to be willing to, you know, invoke their hatred and go after them and try to break them up.
Right.
So anyway, we wanted to be a little bit positive here and give them a little bit of credit for at least saying something that is
talking about the right stuff,
directionally correct.
Yeah.
But as is often the case with the Biden administration, I mean, the beginning of his administration, we track this routinely where you do an executive order where you're like, well, that sounds good, but I dug into the details and it doesn't actually really do a whole lot. This is another case in point of that direction.
And this is what we always try to do here. Trump, you know, same thing. Every time will be like, oh, we're going after so-and-so. And then we dig into the plan. We're like,
no, you're not.
Yeah, but kind of. I mean, you said it. You said the nice thing, but then you didn't actually do it. So this is what we try to parse. You know, at least he's talking about the right stuff. If anything, spread the word. This is why your meat prices are high. All it can really do, you know, people like Bill Bullard and others, you know, there's a lot of people who are really suffering out there. And it affects all of us. I mean, this is an American identity, what you eat, and also the people who produce it. We have to protect them. So,
yep,
there we go.
Very well said.